Hello, everyone. Happy June and welcome to our monthly webinar. Today we have some super experts on our panel and we are going to discuss a question that's top of mind for everybody right now, which is what do I need to know about hiring tech talent or keeping tech talent in this new era that we are entering? I'm Caitlin Allen, your moderator and the VP of Marketing at OpenComp, which for those who are new is a company that over 3,000 pre-IPO organizations use to extend runway and conserve cash with comp programs and headcount plans and the like. Before we introduce our speakers in the chat, please introduce yourself and share where you're calling in from, your title, and what engineering role you are looking to hire. And if you're feeling particularly brave and wanting to create some community, you can share your LinkedIn profile as well so that people can help you out. And on the logistics side, as normal, this webinar is being recorded and we'll share it with you tomorrow alongside the report that we're going to be walking through. And if you have questions, you can hold them for the end if you want to go the traditional conservative route. We also have pretty lively webinar chats that tend to guide the content of the discussion, so you can send those in this chat here. And now I will introduce our panel of speakers. So first up, we have Chris Starr, who is the Senior Recruiter for Engineering Leadership at Airbnb. Fun fact, Chris and I worked together at Lyft. I met him when we were taking the train to work, and he's a great guy and really excited for him to share with you what he has learned throughout his career. He began his career in the Marines and then pivoted into recruiting for the DoD and CIA and NSA, and then transitioned to working at some tech companies that have some great names that we probably all know, like Anki and Oculus and Lyft. And he was actually employee number 59 at Oculus. So Chris, welcome. Next, we have Matt Hartley, who is co-founder and chief product officer at BreachRx. That is a startup in the incident readiness and response area. He has almost 25 years of expertise in all kinds of areas ranging from cybersecurity to threat intelligence and information operations at companies that you will also know, like FireEye, the US Air Force, and Lockheed Martin. And you may know the face, the last person I've got to introduce here, which is Julia Dow, our VP of Compensation Services at OpenComp. She has 15 years of experience working with companies like Discord and Reddit and Visa and Raytheon, to name just a few. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. I think what I'm really excited about today is the variety of viewpoints you all have to share. We've got somebody that is full-time recruiting. We have somebody that advises companies on their hiring compensation strategies and also is a real-life operator. And Matt as well has deep expertise in leading high-performance engineering and technical teams. So all kinds of fabulous perspectives here that I'm really excited for you to hear about. Really quickly, let's start out by talking a little bit about why we are here today, and then we'll get into the content of the report. So, scaling back a couple months, very different landscape than it is today. Clearly, it was a candidates market. People were paying astronomical amounts for all kinds of roles, including technical roles. And over the last month or two, we've seen the market shift. Startups have geared much more towards conserving cash and extending runway, which often means pausing new hires. What we'll learn about today is where people are investing their time and how they're doing that with technical talent. So I think my first question for the crew here, and Chris, maybe we'll start with you, is what are you seeing in the market today? Are we seeing how much are things changing from your vantage point?
Definitely from a overall candidate pool, there's been a huge increase, obviously specific to Airbnb of recent, where we announced the work anywhere, live anywhere policy. I think Brian shared the huge number of increase we had on our career page. I think there was a couple of drivers there. To your point, the layoffs and the landscape of current companies. So then there's an interest of seeing Airbnb still continuing to hire. I know we're continuing to hire across all our engineering teams, and obviously I focus on engineering leadership, and probably myself and another recruiter have roughly a dozen open leadership roles currently. But from a landscape, I'm seeing folks the talent demand pool has definitely increased in comparison to the actual opportunities and roles themselves.
Hmm. Matt, Julia, what would you all add there?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would say not only are there more people that are out there that are available to hire, but I would say for those that maybe have been looking a little bit before all this happened, their life is probably a lot harder now.
Yeah.
And then, for those, I definitely have seen a lot of companies that have had to do layoffs try to find companies that are hiring to help the people. I love seeing that on LinkedIn with the folks that I know. And so I think there's an opportunity that maybe wasn't there recently to go find, make it easier to go find roles that are out there.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think startups are getting more opportunity to get some talent from larger names that are doing these layoffs. And so if you're catching them at the right opportunity or really giving them an appealing project to work on and culture and environment and competitive pay package, it's a little bit easier to get that attention and also follow through with an offer and hopefully an acceptance.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was out at drinks last night with a couple other people who were here in Denver, and a few of them are recruiters on our team. And we actually closed a candidate last night that we had reached out to right after he got laid off the day after. And just right time, kind of place. And so there are some opportunities there. I know. Good on them, right, Chris?
Right.
So silver linings, I guess.
I think it also says a lot about how companies handle layoffs, and to Matt's point of being out there and being helpful. I was a part of Lyft when they had the initial layoff in 2020, and I know both Jay-Z and Logan were very passionate about helping the ex-Lyfters find employment. And I raised my hand and helped build out some training materials that we ended up had a small pool of recruiters that all worked with individuals and gave them opportunity to volunteer for resume writing and interview tips and things of that nature. But I saw that go a long way just to the Lyft community, and how Airbnb, I wasn't with Airbnb, but I know Brian and leadership there had similar, just very helpful, empathetic view of how they handled the layoff situation.
And even companies squeezing now are going to have to hire at some point again. And so that reputationally, it's so important. So I agree completely. That's great.
Really well said. Awesome. Well, let's dive into this report. The first thought that I want to start with before we get into the report demographics is really about silver linings. And I love this next quote on the next slide, which is just about how oftentimes when people are fearful, it's a really good time to be greedy. And obviously that's a forceful way of saying maybe a sentiment that could be more palatable, but just there's opportunity out there. And so I'd like to, I'm excited for some real talk today along these lines. So getting into the actual report content that we're going to all respond to and talk about, in April and May, we sent out an online survey to 500 engineering leaders and hiring managers at 500 pre-IPO startups. And you can see the information here on the slide of how their job titles were split and what their role is in the hiring process, as well as the company size. Mostly leadership representation, a lot of hiring managers, a lot of C-level and VP level. And then there's a pretty even representation across the size of pre-IPO company. So the insights that we're going to walk through today and chat through will represent what they have told us. And then we're going to layer on to that with some real life expertise and commentary. So before we dive in, what I'd like to ask the group, the audience, pardon me, so that we know kind of what kind of your priorities are right now, is how many engineers you are currently looking to hire right now. Is it 1 to 5? Is it 5 to 10? Is it 11 to 20? Is it something more on the shorter side of things? And I think, there we go. Poll number 1. We'll just give everybody a couple minutes to fill that out as we start to transition as well to the next slide. So I think what was interesting for us to find as we read the responses to this survey is how high demand for engineers still was, and remains today as well. We're going to talk some about the insights that we get through the OpenComp platform as well. I'll let the poll finish and then we'll transition. Okay, so a large representation of 1 to 5, which likely means we've got some earlier stage folks here, and then kind of even split for 5 to 10 and 11 to 20. Great. All right, so next slide, please. The demand for engineers, obviously there's still hiring going on, despite the economic downturn that we're seeing. And I think my question for this crew is, and Chris, you addressed some of this already, but how are each of you seeing trends around current tech talent, open roles, and what changes have you seen being made to engineering headcount plans in light of what's going on with the economy and as we wait to see what's happening? Matt, maybe we can start with you.
Sure. So for us, we are extremely small company still, and so we definitely extended our hiring plan out, sort of stretching our roadmap and leaning into other areas of the business to continue to try to drive growth. I think you had it earlier in a slide, right? Like VCs say, go long on your runway. Where I'd say we're more in that camp than other companies that I've talked to, maybe that are a little further along. So early stage companies probably slowing things down. And I think one key thing for leaders is that you always have to be cognizant of the fact that you can't drive your people into the ground. So we're being deliberate about our focus and our roadmap, as part of extending out our hiring plan.
And personal note, and hopefully that's okay. I was actually part of a second layoff that Lyft had end of 2020. About 40 of us in the people team were impacted. I was like an IC6, so equivalent of an M1 on the management side. And as they were working on that path of profitability, there's all these question marks. They had to make some tough decisions, right? But then the blessing in disguise was Airbnb was looking at 2021 and forecasting this travel rebound and like things starting to open up. And to that slide ahead, we're getting and rebuilding the recruiting machine in ahead of what they were hoping to be a phenomenal year, which we have ended up having and seeing. But I know specifically there is that thought and very mindful approach to what that roadmap, as Matt was saying, what's the roadmap, and being very mindful to the resources that you currently have, and then the whys behind why you need additional resources. I think having worked in various startups and then larger scale companies, and being recruited, like I see, I get recruited like, oh, we're going to double, we're going to triple in size. I'm like, in my mind, as I'm not an engineer, but working in this space for 20 plus years, I try to think a little bit like an engineer. And I'm like, well, what are we solving for? Why are we doubling or tripling? Like, you're just saying that for what reason? And so again, just being very thoughtful and mindful to the why you're hiring, I think is going to be very important.
Yep, solid point. I've heard it said recently that the financial plan at a company is effectively, when you're a startup, the same thing as your headcount plan, because we spend so much on compensation, right? So having those planning tools, having that visibility, being able to answer that why, to your point, Chris, so important. Julia, I'm going to pose a question to you, if you don't mind, from the audience. Tyler wants to know if we expect that the hiring trend, critical hires being either reduced, other non-critical hires being put on pause. Do we expect that trend to continue? And are we seeing among our client base offer acceptance rates going down?
So I wish we all had a crystal ball and we could understand, because even COVID, we were like, how long is this going to last? 2 weeks? We're done? No, it was like years. So I don't think I'm going to play the fortune teller on that one, but I do think VCs have been warning or have been talking about this being like a 2-year thing, right? Like make sure you have enough runway for a 2-year, for 2 years and plan to that. So I think you're going to just see a little bit more fiscal responsibility, and a lot more companies come back to like the basics of running a company and focusing on revenue and getting to profitability. So there's that. What was the second point of the question? I'm sorry.
The second question was about offer acceptance rates. Are we seeing those go down as competition doubles down for tech talent?
I wouldn't say I would say that we're probably seeing offer acceptance rates increase slightly, but I also think people were feeling very at the whim of the market. Like we can't find data that matches what we're seeing. We have to make all these exceptions to hire on a candidate. I think it's probably tempering down a little bit more to where offers aren't so extravagant, or they're always feeling like they're having to compromise their comp philosophy to get the talent in the door. So I think that engineers will still be in demand. I think they're still going to be at a slight premium, and they're going to be competing against multiple offers. But I just don't think it's going to be the fervor it was over the last quarter, 2 quarters, year.
Sure, that makes sense. All right, well, let's go to the next slide. The next one is about the hardest positions to hire. And as you can see here, according to the survey, senior software and hardware engineers are the hardest to hire. OpenComp's database tells a different story. We show that machine learning engineers are actually the hardest to recruit. And so I'm curious what Trav agrees with me. That's good to know, Trav. I like being among people that agree with me. I would love to hear from the panelists as well. Like, is this surprising data to you? And Chris, maybe we can start with you here. What would you say to this?
I would not disagree with you, because I don't want to be on that side of the equation. So I agree.
Smart man.
Yeah, I think this slide is very telling. I did help. I jumped in and was helping with some key IC hires, and the competition and for senior software engineering talent is intense. And I had at one point I had one candidate that we were at offer phase with, had 9 competing offers, and I was poignant and asked how did they get their job done. All these, like this was with Meta, and Airbnb has a very rigorous hiring process, and it was dumbfounding. But we ended up not closing that person, and they went after I know this will come up later, but compensation was definitely one of their factors that they used. And that's something in a difference also. I don't want to talk too much, but working with leadership hiring versus IC hiring, and the motivators are definitely a lot different with folks later in their careers versus earlier in their careers. So that's definitely a different nuance. So again, I think that ties to this slide.
What are the differences in those motivations at a senior or an individual contributor level?
Yeah, I think at a senior level in leadership, I find folks are more aligning with company cultures and mission and opportunity to grow, and looking at problems that they can help solve for, more mindful of that than necessarily compensation. And I find more ICs are driven by, competing offers and trying to push each offer up and like a 1-to-1, where a senior candidate is really being thoughtful for what's next and where can they align themselves for years to come, and not necessarily like a 2 or 3 year outlook, where I think, I shouldn't say I think, I find most IC talent in their junior careers are thinking 2 years out, and they'll hop somewhere else after that.
Matt, you were nodding. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would say something I've heard from a lot of friends that are at larger companies is that where they might have leaned into a really amazing hire where the person was overqualified for the role that they had. So hiring like a level 7 type of person into a level 6 role or a level 5 role just because the talent is there. It's we're always looking for great talent. I think now what I'm hearing is that companies are backing off from that and being more prescriptive about the role that they actually have. And so it doesn't shock me at all that these what I call mid-level positions are highly competitive, because now you have companies that have been willing to hire higher level people into these types of roles, not doing that as much. So the pool is what the pool is of experienced folks. I would also add to your bottom part here, and machine learning engineers are very challenging. I would say you kind of have the very similar strata of security, DevOps, mobile, machine learning. I think in my experience, like with what we do in security and privacy, security engineers have always been challenging to find on a similar scale. I was actually surprised to see mobile engineers on here. Not sure, why exactly, but ultimately, I do feel like the data is right.
One thing that, again, of course, was out with the recruiting team last night for drinks. What I heard is common these days sometimes is that technical talent will accept multiple jobs at the same time. And then they kind of work multiple jobs at the same time until that's found out. Is that something that you all are seeing at all? Anybody on the panel? Maybe not Julia, because we don't want to out anyone at OpenComp.
I have not seen that yet personally, so I don't have anything to add on that one.
Yeah, I've heard about it. I think probably a worse story instead of the 2 jobs thing is you hire someone and then they've outsourced their job to someone else and they don't tell you. So I know of some companies that have had to face that, and obviously as a security violation, essentially in part. And so that's a pretty horrific thing to hear about. Unfortunately, it's kind of like 2 handfuls total.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yes, double dipping, Tyler. That is the truth. All right, great. I will come back to, thank you. Perfect. So in terms of top barriers to hiring, would love to hear from everyone on the call how this strikes you. Some of this is probably rapidly changing as we go along, just because the market is shifting so quickly. But these top barriers, maybe double clicking into them too to give you some data. Of the 3 that are the top, smaller companies of less than 250 employees were more likely to blame the job market generally. And we saw understanding of top barriers like specifically deepen as a company grows or gets more mature. And so some of what we saw as well was companies of 250 to 500, so the larger sample size, had a more granular understanding of the barriers to their effective hiring, and they sourced insufficient compensation data 2 times more often than other respondents. So I'm curious, Julie, maybe we can start with you here. What are your thoughts around these barriers and overcoming them?
I mean, I think they're probably pretty in line. I'm not very surprised on any of that. And the trends that you were hearing, it also makes sense as your process is mature and you have more data and in your processes that you're able to intake and pinpoint, like this is where candidates drop out, or you have the ability to collect decline reasons. I think anything that goes along with having a candidate accept an offer, compensation is obviously one of them. Being able to tell, especially for startups or pre-IPO companies, is being able to tell your equity story and being able to articulate the value of that, because I think a lot of times it's lost on candidates. Again, this market is making that a little bit more challenging because valuations were at different places than they are today. Mm-hmm. But then also you have to be offering like a great company culture, right? The opportunity to develop professionally, the opportunity to try new things, the work-life balance that you might be wanting. So I think there's all these other check marks that compensation is definitely an easy thing to point to and probably the heaviest weighted, but those smaller things can tip things up. It can tip a decision in one direction or another, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. Matt, when we had our practice call, you talked some about the importance for engineers of the challenge and understanding what their work will attack. Maybe would you mind speaking to that some too?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all know engineers are solving challenges, right? And most engineers I know enjoy solving challenges, myself included. Part of the job is puzzling through and figuring out how to build something. And so my experience, you see engineers accept roles where they can tell that there's a good culture, but they also have intriguing problems to solve. And Chris brought this up earlier, large company, small company, senior role, a less senior role. I think the mission is part of that as well. And so, being in the security and privacy space, it's a lot of times a lot easier than some other companies to have a really strong, exciting mission. Like in our company, our mission is helping people reduce risks around security and privacy incidents. Very visible, very painful for businesses, and it's kind of like a noble calling. And so when you have those types of missions, and then you're engineers are solving technical challenges to help customers with these really painful problems. That's exciting. And so I think to Julia's point, the barriers are there, but having every chip you can in your corner to tip the scales in your favor, I think goes a long way. And so yeah, the technical challenge is one of them, and it's often overlooked in the hiring process.
Very true.
Chris,
very true.
Go
That's
ahead.
sorry, felt it was in the natural. You're going that way. So I had the honor of recruiting for Booz Allen Hamilton for like 10 years. And I remember when I first started working there, they had a team gathering, and they were like, the media team was like interviewing people like, well, why Booz Allen? Why are you here? I kept hearing the people. And I was like, I didn't get it right then. I mean, obviously I saw the message, but then working there for 10 years and seeing how engaged they were in the community. And as you were mentioning, the corporate development infrastructure, I think that's something that can lack in startups, where they're, not necessarily helping from, college or furthering their education. I remember Booz used to give like $10,000 a year for your continued academic education. And then once I pivoted to Oculus and moved over into the Silicon Valley, you don't see that. And I found it very interesting. And looking back, I have people that are still working with Booz Allen that I hired, 15, 10, 20 years ago. And, again, they're there because of the people, they're there because they're being invested in, and that culture is strong. And to your point, Matt, I think culture is overlooked very often. And it's not just, hey, we have free lunches and we have ping pong tables set up and, we have a happy hour every other Friday. There's a lot more to that. Airbnb actually has core value interviews. So there are 2 30-minute core value interviews that are part of the hiring decision process. So it's been a pleasure having an opportunity now to work for a company that realized from how they started the culture, how you continue to maintain that hire over a hire and growth. It's been a nice feeling to see it's actually part of the process.
I'm curious too what you all think about the one that says can effectively articulate the value of equity. That's something that we hear a lot from particularly earlier stage startups of how do you position that to someone that could potentially go join, a large company like Airbnb or maybe a FANG versus a smaller startup. And Chris, you've obviously been at all different sizes of companies, and Matt, you have as well. And Julia, you work with all different sizes of companies. So I'd love to understand what that looks like when it's done well.
I've had clients have success with having a really good equity calculator that they could give to candidates, where it pretty much you can plug in okay, if we were to go IPO at the size that Facebook did or smaller than that, and they do different companies and make it kind of fun to where a candidate's able to still peg to something and see how equity can grow. But they're not obviously promising any future valuation or going down that path of putting markers there. I've had that be a good thing. Obviously education is a big one, and just being able to explain how do these shares, because sometimes candidates just see a share count, and that a share count means nothing in relation to the total shares outstanding of the company. And so being able to talk them through well, this is actually what it means is a percent ownership, or if we were to translate this out to dollar value. So knowing the ways that in which a candidate's trying to compare it to other offers is also really helpful in articulating how it might stand, because they might not know it all.
Definitely concur with that. I know when I was with Oculus, again, prior to the Facebook acquisition, one of the aspects that I thought was very smart by the leadership team was when we talked compensation, recruiting was a very high level, but we would end up, Laird was our CFO, and he would have those conversations with candidates to really, as you were saying, Julie, to map out, here's what this really means when you look at percentage of ownership and dilution and, things that I find, I'm a recruiter, right, wrong, or indifferent. I'm not, a financial advisor. I don't do this every day, day in and day out, like a CFO might. So, from a startup standpoint, I think having your CFO be open to having those conversations really helped us close a lot of candidates, and I felt like it gave the candidate experience, a plus, a tip in the cap for us at the time.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I think from my experience, even beyond just hiring, like just retention and answering people's questions about equity, and culturally too, differences around equity, and just an understanding of stock markets, and the value of stock in other countries sometimes isn't as strong as it is here in the States. So I think being well versed in that, or having a leader be able to step in to the process to talk through that. I think one of the things we've done, and I not 100% positive, but we found a template. Actually, it was recommended to us, and I believe it was from Carta, that was almost like an offer letter in a slide deck form, and part of that was explaining equity, and really teeing up the conversation, not trying to be the full answer, but just teeing up the conversation in the hiring process. And we've had a lot of luck with that, and really shaping that template to our needs. But that's one thing that we've done. So I agree with what you all are saying there, that's a key piece.
Matt, Trav is hoping you can share that. Trav, I can get that from Matt and follow up with you on it. I'll take that as a note.
Yeah, I can find it.
Yeah, right. Definitely. All right, let's transition just to stay on track in terms of content. So the next slide is top reasons that technical talent says no. And as you can see here, like base salary being too low in a competitive market makes a lot of sense. And then lack of growth opportunities is also high up there. I think we're all living in a season right now where it's reasonable to assume that companies can't necessarily increase the cash component that they're offering as readily as they have been in the past, near-term past at least. And that's where emphasizing things like culture and value propositions and non-comp benefits and career progression comes into play here. So we'll start with one question for the group. Matt, why don't we start with you, and then we'll go to Chris after that. What are the top reasons that you're seeing engineers decline offers? Any stories you want to share there?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've touched on it, but the culture piece for me is really important, and understanding the team they're going to fit in. I think people don't always recognize that engineers, even though they're technical people, they are very savvy and can see inside of a hiring process what the organization is like. And most engineers I know want to, just like all of us, right, I guess, enjoy their jobs, but a lot of engineers want to kind of learn from others. They want to be able to mentor others. I mean, everyone's proud of the technical solutions that they've come up with. And so I see culture is a like foundational element of being able to deal with this sort of salary equity divide and challenge. I think for me, just a quick aside, like the worst case is someone that accepts and then they don't show up on day one, and that drives me crazy. And I'm sure all of you all have dealt with that in the past. And for me, for startups, it's easy because it's easy to get busy, to stay engaged with someone between the time they've accepted and the time that they start, to make sure that you don't end up happening. And that in a competitive environment, you have to worry about that more than others. And maybe I would say, in addition, one of the ways that we've dealt with this salary equity balance is using that template that I mentioned. We actually put being a small startup, we can do stuff like this more easily, I think, than a larger company. We put two offers in front of people. We let them decide what weighting they want between cash and equity in that process. And that's been very successful for us in letting people tell us what's more important for them.
Yeah, I definitely have done as a recruiter, that's part of my pre-close, if you will, strategy, is really understanding the candidates' motivators and where their decision factors are. And to your point, some want to have more risk, and where they are in their lives, they can take that risk. And some folks, where they are in their lives and careers, can't. So really helping understand that, and then working with our comp team or hiring managers to like partner a right offer for each candidate, right? Like tailoring it. I think that's something that's important. From the decline perspective, I think it's a little bit of a challenge because Airbnb tends to, we're obviously no longer a startup, but in my experience before, I definitely would concur with the slide and the ties to our conversation a little bit earlier about really helping someone understand what the equity component looks like, because they may think it's too low, but when you actually walk through it, it really isn't. And so again, it's, I think, taking time at the offer stage to really make sure you're addressing questions that a candidate has that'll help decrease the declines that you'll have.
One quick question that I'm getting from the audience commentary. Celeste made a very good point that as a mission-based company and a director of talent, she is sad not to see lack of mission on here as an option, which is a fantastic point and is actually some of what we use sometimes to position to engineers because we are a mission-driven business. I'm curious what that plays into what you all see on the market today.
Absolutely. And again, I'm not trying to tout Airbnb, but that was something that attracted me as well to Airbnb. When I was going through after the layoff at Lyft, I was being heavily recruited by Tesla. And I apologize, I don't mean anything against Elon Musk and Tesla. They're a great company, but I have, as a recruiter, I had heard stories about the culture and just how that business is run. And it was just something that I had a hard time aligning myself with. Obviously, I love the actual mission, but the company culture was different alignment. And so coming here and having this, a mission-based company who gives back to the community, I find candidates are coming to us because of that. And I think given the tighter market, more people are being driven by the types of companies they're working for, I should say, are wanting to be a part of those mission-based companies versus another company.
I would agree. I would say, some of those people are probably saying, getting to a point where they don't feel like the culture is a fit, even though it might be, the mission is not a fit. But I also suspect that there are people say, up at the top here that are saying there's not enough cash or not enough equity or whatever, because they haven't found another driver for that business. So
sure.
I've said it before. I think like mission is a really critical element in my experience and career for convincing folks to join.
Yeah, that makes sense. As we head in the direction of social enterprise, it's kind of the definition of business. I think that will increase as well.
I recently had a candidate who had a fairly short stint at Facebook, now Meta, and as I was unpacking some of the rationale, his reasoning was he thought when he went in, he would be able to help change the culture and change some drivers and make a difference, and then quickly saw that wasn't going to happen. And again, not talking poorly about Facebook or Meta, it was just his personal driver that he wanted to leave, and went ahead and applied to Airbnb. And again, was very thoughtful as I was asking about companies he's pursuing currently. Because of that experience, he is very, very selective in the types of companies he's looking to work for next.
It's a great story. All right, let's move on to the next slide. This one captures what the most emphasized benefit is during hiring, and the question that was asked along with this data was within the context of that you find to be the most effective in closing candidates. And so this gets back to how do you differentiate, what is important. I personally found it to be very interesting that healthcare was so high up there. Chris agrees. And so would just love to hear reactions to this in general. Like retirement planning was also really high, which surprised me. What are your thoughts here, folks?
I think these make sense because they're the most basic, right? Like most companies offer pay and compensation and healthcare and benefits. And so if they're lacking those, I think it's a really big, like, whoa, that's a basic almost I have to have. Same thing with retirement planning, that's 401k, right? And now more and more the ability to remote work is kind of considered work-life balance at this point. And also, are you expected to respond on off hours? Can I leave an email that comes in on Saturday till Monday? So this kind of makes sense to me. I think the only other thing that I'm not surprised, but I think it might fall into some of these somehow, is professional development, or like the work that you're actually doing. And if you think about what startups can do to make a difference, or that they might have up on any of these, is also you're able to build things from the ground up. To Chris's point, you're able to actually change or put a process in place in the ideal way that you think it should be run, versus trying to steer a really big ship in one direction. So I think you also have a little bit of a competitive edge that way in some things.
I really agree with that, Julia. I think for a startup, being able to lean into the nature of the business, being early, a lot of times maybe building something from the ground up, or maybe they're not, super deep into whatever it is that they're building, versus a larger business that maybe, someone's gonna have a more bureaucratic process they're gonna have to fight through, or they're gonna have an immense amount of technical debt based on old technology that, an engineer is gonna face a lot of kind of drudgery to work through in that job. That's very unappealing. And so startups being able to say like, oh, we have this great process, we have this great tech stack, look at our architecture, we're on the cutting edge here, representing those things. Big advantage for startups to be able to recruit, in my experience. So, and that sometimes helps overcome some of this stuff. Like, I don't know how many companies I've worked at now, smaller companies that don't have 401k plans, and it's a pain to hire without one. It really is. And so, trying to slot something else in to demonstrate like this sort of technical acumen and technical approach, for me has been a nice substitute.
Yeah, Caitlin, to your point, I was a little bit surprised on the healthcare plane as high as it is, and on this, I tend to have like at the very end healthcare conversations and sharing benefits, and most of the time I would say the candidate's already made a decision to accept the offer,
Right.
and then, oh, hey, by the way, you have benefits. Yeah, oh, here you go, right? Like it doesn't seem like it's their top of mind decision maker. But I think the work-life balance piece, especially from a startup standpoint, is important, because I've worked in companies where they talk about work-life balance, but then you're answering emails and phone calls on the weekends and late hours and things of that nature from the leaders down, right? And so that sends a different message to your employees if you're there working on the weekends and expecting responses versus respecting the time off and the time away to do, that balance area, right? And I think that's also shifted with companies moving away from PTO plans and going to this, a la carte, benefit or leave policy, where you can actually be told, no, you can't take that time off. But if you actually had PTO where you're accruing PTO, that's your time off, and I think that culture has shifted quite a bit.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Katie, I think is how you pronounce it, just commented that she feels like benefits also includes things like maternity and paternity leaves, which is the case. Katie, I should have called that out in the survey itself, in parentheses, healthcare, that was included, and workplace initiatives are much more focused on things like DE&I initiatives and give back programs and things along those lines. So thank you for calling that out. Anything else you all want to say on this slide before we move to the next? Okay, great. So the second to last slide here is effectively communicates that what matters more to candidates, according to the survey participants, is that equity matters more than cash, which is obviously a good message to hear in a time of economic downturn. So it was fortuitous from that perspective. And as from my perspective, at least, the news also presents a strategic opportunity for startups versus FAANG companies. If engineers do in fact want, like, they can make kind of the same cash regardless of wherever they are, for the most part, at least according to our database. But if they're interested in equity, then if you can articulate that equity value, you really have that advantage. And I think too, the other thing is, as stock options kind of go underwater, right? There's negative value there associated for companies that are public. So those are my immediate reactions. I think I'm curious to hear from you all what your reactions are to this, and what being responsible with cash and equity looks like for your companies as you think about attracting engineers.
Again, I think it goes to really understanding the candidates, drivers and motivations, to the point of, what's more important to them. Is it cash? Is it equity? Is it a balance between the two? I do agree that I find most candidates find equity matters more than cash. And, as I'm now looking at, a candidate with an offer, our stock price was, very consistent at, 160 to 170, and now we're very consistent to be around 100, given the current market. And so there's, the amount of upside I'm looking at trying to sell, with, hey, this is where we are today when we're talking about numbers of RSUs you're going to have. But in reality, like if the market changes in 2 years and we go back to where we had been consistently, this package is going to look like X, Y, or Y. Obviously can't predict the future, can't make any promises, but really helping, show where we are currently in the market and where the market could be going back to at some point.
I would agree with that. And I think from what I've seen and heard, there are a lot of folks coming out of these, the larger tech companies that maybe had great salaries for a while that have conserved some level of cash, and are willing to, as a startup like our company, even more so willing to lean into equity like taking a role. So I think it's, that's an upside in terms of the current market. The folks that are still hiring in startup land have an opportunity to maybe find some folks that are willing, as they understand equity, to lean in more there, and help conserve that runway.
Mm-hmm. Julia, obviously there's a big planning component where equity is concerned because you only have a certain set amount. How would you recommend, based upon how we work with companies, that startups approach their engineering headcount plan and creating it? What are the necessary inputs from a comp and pay range perspective, as well as the questions they need to answer?
Yeah, so you need to obviously understand what roles you need in your organization. You need to benchmark and level them. So are they machine learning engineers, software engineers, QA engineers? Are they senior, developing, entry, manager, director? Then that obviously leads to a benchmark benchmark data and or pay range that you have already set up. And so thinking about those, having your ranges set up so you know what you're going to go to, what you're going to spend, right? You know what you're going to go to market with, how you can flex up or flex down. And also thinking about, when you think about equity, burn models are a big thing that we do for our clients a lot. So we take a look at current headcount that they plan to hire, and then ongoing programs like refresh or promotions or top talent grants to make sure that like you can hire all these folks, but then you can also continue to reward them during their time with your company. And does that also match the option pool that you have to give out to employees, not just engineers, but the rest of your organization? So really having that good headcount plan, but also understanding how you want to manage ongoing programs is really key to understanding also how you're going to impact your dilution this year, next year, et cetera, especially if there isn't any expansions to pools or you don't want to go back to your board and ask for more.
That's like a plus 1,000 really point. So true.
Yeah, that's great.
Cool. All right. So then I guess we'll wrap it up. The last slide that we have here, our CEO wrote an article about startup must-haves during economic uncertainty, and I'll give a brief overview and then we can dive in from the panelists' perspective. But I made the statement earlier on in the call that for a lot of startups, the headcount plan is effectively your financial plan, right? And so the necessary inputs to a headcount plan, you need to make sure that those are accurate and that those are setting you up to model scenarios and make data-driven decisions about the future of your company that you can trust, right? So you don't end up in a place where you're making massive layoffs or whatever the case is. And so that's what the 1, 2, and 3 are here that you see. Build that headcount plan that's based on modeling scenarios. What goes into that? is having really solid pay ranges that are based upon reliable compensation data, and meaning don't use something that is stale. You need something to be real time, use something that's employer reported, not employee reported, and then have those pay ranges that map to your comp philosophy that get put into your headcount plan. So you've got that high and that low that is really reliable. That is a non-comp experts overview. So I'm definitely going to pass the mic here. Julia, what would you add?
I think you touched on all of that, or I think you touched on the key things. I would call you a comp person at this point, working.
Yes. Almost at my year anniversary.
Yeah. No, I think these are the must-haves. I think just also aligning your comp philosophy with your strategy and making sure that you're consistent and equitable, and that as you're trying to either scale back or do different strategies to make sure you're conserving that runway, you're also not taking out any of the diversity or equitable practices or efforts that you've put into place, because I think a lot of companies do that as well.
Very true. Underrepresented groups are often adversely affected during times like right now.
Very true. Yeah, I think, I worked for a startup a while back that, Caitlin, I think your point was very valid of having relevant data that's not stale, because our data felt very stale as a recruiter on the front line, right? I was, getting competitive offer data, and it was very interesting how that market data was current and relevant. And when we were looking at the data that our HR comp tool was pulling, it put us in challenging, precarious situations for closes. So that resonated with me.
Yeah, me too. I think both in previous roles, having someone using or trying to enforce a pay range is unrealistic for the role you're trying to hire. Like we talked about security engineers and ML engineers earlier being impossible to hire. If you have a pay range for them that looks like a standard senior software engineer, you're not going to hire any. And so I think having that is great. And then for startups, it's hard to just get the data in general. And so I think for me as well, I think that's really important. And maybe the three I would say for all those on the call that are on the recruiting side. One of the things as an engineer and as an engineering leader that I've tried to leave with the folks that I've had the opportunity to work with over the years is engineering has to be treated and run like a business. And still to the day, many engineering leaders don't think that way because they tend to come up from a technical track. And so I'm really understanding where the business is going and being disciplined about your headcount plan in that regard is really important. And it's easy to say and it's hard to do, but right now with where we're at, it's really critical. And so, I just wanted to kind of throw that out as something that, would be valuable to remind everyone, aligning that, as you said, in a startup, especially, headcount is the business in many cases, or a big portion of the business spend. Yeah.
I appreciate that.
One of the things I was thinking of too is, partnering with the recruiters that you have in a startup to really gather that competitive data. Something I've seen when, working with a larger company, we're gathering as much competitive data so that we work with our comp team to, we know if someone's got an offer from Google at this level, over the years, you're going to know that this range is what to expect, right? And various companies. And I think when you're in the startup mode, there's less focus on that. And, from an aspect of how do you close against your competitors, that those metrics, those data points are really key. And I don't know that startups do that as well or as effective as, a larger scale company can do.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Question from the audience is what particular sourcing boards you all find more engaging than others? And the comment is that LinkedIn is pretty large and engineers are probably already flooded with InMails. I guess, Chris, we're asking you to give away your secrets, so maybe we shouldn't ask you that question.
I don't use a lot of the boards. I do. I find LinkedIn tends to be the major. I mean, obviously there's all sorts of tips and tricks that you can find, speakers and conferences and things of that nature, right? But day to day in reality, it's our career page in LinkedIn. and network. Like referrals are always key. I think one of the aspects that I loved in the startup world was the amount of referrals that we were able to work with and leverage, right? Like in most companies, having someone, the challenge can be obviously from a diversity perspective. If we're trying to expand diversity and have D&I initiatives, sometimes the referral network can have a smaller pool. So opening that up and recruiting from LinkedIn, I think, it gives you opportunities to look at various groups that people can be a part of, so you can jump into those communities and start to network from that end. But yeah, I tend to not use a lot of the boards. It tends to be more inbound in LinkedIn reach outs.
I would concur, like networking is number one. LinkedIn is actually, I would agree, is a pretty good one. And then we've had some luck with the AngelList boards, which coming from a larger company, I hadn't thought of initially, just personally. And so someone put me on that one, and we've had some luck with that one as well. But yeah, I think it's a lot, for me, it's a lot more network than anything else.
Offering this up too, obviously I'm hiring marketers, but something that I've done in the past that's worked really well as well is either go into ZoomInfo and look at kind of how a company's email structure is made, or just guess and do a lot of things on BCC and then send direct emails where I tell someone, really admire your profile, would love to talk, here's a little bit about the company. And that outreach has also worked pretty well. Don't know how it'll land with engineers, but I don't think a human generally doesn't like hearing that they look impressive online.
I think to your point is really tailoring that message to the each person, and not going into too much verbose on an email. I think engineers rather, be short, direct, and to the point. And at least in my experience, that's lands well, rather than this, 5-page paragraph, or excuse me, 5-paragraph email that they haven't even said I love you yet. Like they may not even care about all that data that you're just sharing with them. So like, I think it's more about the problem you're solving, directness to their relevant experience to you, why you're reaching out. Lands much better with an engineer than a non-engineer.
Fabulous. Well, this has been incredibly enjoyable. Thank you, everybody. Any last questions before we pop off? As I said at the beginning, I'm just going to kill some time here in case anyone has some questions. We'll send the recording. We'll also send you the report, which is a deeper dive into the content we shared today. Chris, Matt, Julia, thank you so very much. This has been enjoyable and enlightening, and I appreciate you making the time to do it.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Caitlin. It's great.
It's been really fun. All right, everyone have a good day. See you next month.
Bye.
Cheers.